What if the most feared knockout artist in boxing right now was in the foster care system by the time he was 5 years old? Pause. No father around. Mother struggling. Bounced from home to home before he even started kindergarten. And somehow, from that chaos, came one of the most explosive, most dangerous fighters of this entire generation. That's Gervonta Tank Davis. Emphasis. A man who fills arenas, breaks pay-per-view records, and knocks grown men unconscious with a single left hand, but also a man who's been surrounded by controversy, legal trouble, and chaos outside the ring for years. Today, I want to tell you the real story, not just the highlight reels, not just the headlines. I want to show you where this all started, in the toughest part of West Baltimore, and how a broken childhood shaped both the greatness and the chaos that follows Gervonta Davis to this day. Let's get into it. Born into Sandtown, Winchester, Gervonta Davis was born on November 7th, 1994, in Baltimore, Maryland. Pause. He grew up in a neighborhood called Sandtown, Winchester, in West Baltimore. And if you know anything about that area, you know it's one of the roughest, most heavily impacted neighborhoods in the entire city. A place scarred by decades of poverty, drugs, and violence. Gervonta himself has described his childhood neighborhood as being worse than what most people saw on TV shows about Baltimore's toughest streets. That's not an exaggeration for effect. That's how he actually experienced growing up there. His parents, Ryan Davis and Kenya Brown, both struggled with drug addiction. Emphasis. And when both parents are fighting addiction, in and out of jail, in and out of stability, the children are the ones who pay the price. That's exactly what happened to young Gervonta and his brother. At just 5 years old, Child Protective Services stepped in. Gervonta and his siblings were placed into foster care. A grandmother's 3-year fight. Now, here's a detail from Gervonta's life that I think gets overlooked, and it's honestly one of the most important parts of this entire story. Pause. His grandmother did not give up on him. While Gervonta and his brother were cycling through foster homes and group homes, his grandmother fought for 3 straight years to get her grandsons out of the system and back into a stable home. 3 years. Emphasis. Think about how long that actually is in a child's life. 3 years of uncertainty. 3 years of not knowing where home really was. 3 years of a young boy trying to figure out who he could actually trust in a system that kept moving him around. Eventually, his grandmother succeeded. She and his mother took on the responsibility of raising him. But the damage of those early years, the instability, the anger, the sense that the world could take everything away from you at any moment, that doesn't just disappear because the paperwork changes. Gervonta has talked about it directly. He said his mother left him and his brother home alone one day. Someone called Child Protective Services, and that's what triggered the whole ordeal. It's a raw, honest admission from a man who doesn't usually talk about vulnerability in public, and there's something even harder buried in his story. Gervonta has said that one of his siblings was separated from the rest of the family during this period, sent to a different group home entirely. Pause. To this day, by his own account, he doesn't know where that sibling ended up. Sit with that for a second. Emphasis. A world champion, a millionaire, a global superstar, and there's still a piece of his own family lost somewhere in a broken system that he's never been able to find again. Learning to fight before he learned to box, growing up in that environment, in that neighborhood, with that much instability, Gervonta didn't have the luxury of being a soft kid. He had to learn to defend himself early. Pause. At just 8 years old, Gervonta was already stepping in to defend his older brother, who was around 15 at the time, in street altercations. An 8-year-old holding his own against teenagers. That tells you everything about the environment he grew up in. There was no such thing as being too young to have to fight for yourself. One day, his uncle spotted him in one of these street fights, and instead of just breaking it up and sending him home, his uncle saw something in the way Gervonta handled himself. So he took him to a boxing gym instead. That decision changed the entire trajectory of his life. Emphasis. At the Upton Boxing Center in Baltimore, 5-year-old, later described in some accounts as 7-year-old, Gervonta met a coach named Calvin Ford. And Calvin Ford wasn't just any trainer. He had served time in prison himself, earlier in his life, before turning his focus toward mentoring young fighters in Baltimore. Ford became more than a coach to Gervonta. He became something close to a father figure, the steady presence that had been missing for most of his early life. A ruthless nickname with an innocent origin. Here's a fun little detail before we go further into his career. Everybody knows him as Tank. It sounds exactly like what you'd expect, a nickname for a guy who hits like a truck. But the actual origin is way less dramatic. Apparently, the nickname came from the size of his head as a baby, not from his punching power. Pause. Which is honestly kind of funny, because by the time he grew into his boxing career, that nickname ended up fitting him perfectly anyway, just for a completely different reason. Under Calvin Ford's guidance, Gervonta turned that street fighting instinct into real, refined technique. His amateur career became absolutely dominant. By some counts, he finished with over 200 wins and only around 15 losses as an amateur. He won multiple junior Olympic gold medals as a teenager. Emphasis. The angry, unstable kid who used to fight in the streets to protect his brother had transformed into one of the most gifted young boxers in the entire country, turning pro and catching Mayweather's eye. Gervonta turned professional in 2013 at just 18 years old, and almost immediately, people around the sport started noticing his power, his speed, his ability to end fights with a single shot. Eventually, that talent caught the attention of one of the greatest boxers of all time, Floyd Mayweather. Pause. Mayweather signed Gervonta and became a mentor to him, guiding his early career and helping build him into a genuine superstar. In January of 2017, Gervonta delivered the performance that put his name on the map for good. He knocked out Jose Pedraza to win the IBF super featherweight title, becoming one of the youngest world champions in the sport at that time. Emphasis. From there, his career exploded. He moved up in weight, won titles in multiple divisions: super featherweight, lightweight, super lightweight. He fought on some of the biggest cards in the sport, including a spot on the undercard of the legendary Mayweather vs. McGregor event. In 2019, he headlined a card back home in Baltimore that drew 12,000 fans, an emotional homecoming for a kid who once didn't even have a stable place to sleep in that same city. He became must-watch television. Every fight, fans tuned in expecting a knockout, and more often than not, that's exactly what they got. The chaos outside the ring. But here's where Gervonta's story takes a much more complicated turn. Because as his fame and success grew, so did the controversy surrounding him outside the ring. Pause. Over the years, Gervonta has faced multiple legal issues, including assault-related allegations and a domestic violence case that made national headlines. Some of these cases were later dropped or resolved through legal proceedings. But regardless of the outcomes, the headlines and public scrutiny stuck with him, shaping how a large part of the public views him to this day. I want to be honest and fair here. Emphasis. This isn't a part of his story I'm going to gloss over, but it's also not my place to litigate cases that were handled by the actual legal system. What I can tell you is this: the same intensity, the same explosiveness that makes Gervonta electric in the ring is often the exact same trait that's gotten him into trouble outside of it. The line between the fighter the world pays to watch and the man dealing with unresolved trauma from a genuinely brutal childhood has never been a clean, simple line. It's easy to sit outside someone's life and judge the chaos from a distance. It's a lot harder to understand how a kid who was placed in foster care at 5 years old, who lost track of a sibling in the system, who had to physically fight in the streets before he was even 10, how that kid grows into an adult without carrying some of that chaos forward with him. That doesn't excuse anything, but it does help explain it. Pause. Fatherhood. Amid all of that chaos, there's also been growth. Gervonta has 2 daughters, Giovanni, born in 2018, and Giovanna, born in 2021. Emphasis. And by many accounts, fatherhood has given him a different kind of motivation, separate from titles and pay-per-view numbers. For a man who grew up not knowing where his own father was most of the time, who spent years in a system that repeatedly failed to give him stability, becoming a father himself carries a different kind of weight. It's a chance to give his own children something he never fully had growing up. Consistency, presence, a father who shows up, whether or not he's gotten that balance right at every point in his life, is something only he and his family can really speak to. But the intention behind it trying to be different for his kids than what he experienced himself. That's a thread that runs through a lot of his more honest interviews. The fighter behind the headlines. Here's what I think gets lost in all the noise around Gervonta Davis. Strip away the controversies, strip away the tabloid headlines, and you're left with one of the most technically gifted, explosively powerful boxers of this entire era. Pause. He's fought and beaten some of the best fighters in his weight classes. He's headlined events against massive names like Ryan Garcia, drawing pay-per-view numbers that rival boxing's biggest stars. As of recent counts, he's maintained an undefeated professional record with a knockout percentage that's almost unheard of at his level. None of that happens by accident. Behind every single one of those knockouts is a kid who learned to fight before he learned almost anything else. A kid whose coach became his father figure because his real father wasn't there. A kid whose grandmother fought the system for 3 years just so he'd have a real home to go back to. Emphasis. The chaos and the greatness in Gervonta Davis's story aren't two separate things. They came from the exact same place. What his story really means. I think Gervonta Davis is one of the clearest examples in modern boxing of just how complicated a person's story can be. Pause. He's not just a villain. He's not just a hero either. He's a man shaped by one of the hardest childhoods you could imagine, who turned that pain into a boxing style that terrifies opponents, but who's also still visibly working through the same chaos that built him in the first place. His story isn't finished yet. He's still fighting, still building his legacy, still, by all accounts, trying to figure out how to be a better version of himself for his daughters than the version of family he was given as a child. Whatever you think of Gervonta Davis, the man, the story of how he got here is impossible to ignore, and I think it deserves to be understood, not just judged from the outside. At the end of the day, Gervonta Davis's story is a reminder that the loudest, most dominant people in a room are often carrying the quietest, heaviest pasts. Pause. A 5-year-old placed into foster care doesn't just become a superstar overnight. He becomes one by surviving things most of us will never have to understand. Whether he continues to grow from here or whether the chaos keeps following him, one thing is certain: Tank Davis's story is far from over. Emphasis. If this story gave you a different way of seeing him, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I'll keep bringing you the real stories behind the boxers people think they already know. I'll see you in the next video. That's roughly 4,300 words, right in your 30-minute range. One flag before you publish. The legal history section is real and public, but it's also the most sensitive part of this script. You may want to skim it once more yourself and trim anything you're not comfortable putting in Tank's voice via the avatar. Want me to draft a softer alternate version of part 6 or move on to the next boxer's script?